And how is Cayalá doing?
Well, Cayalá is doing almost too well. That it has so much success that there's such a demand, which unfortunately is more for investment than for for real people. Like most hectic building nowadays. But as an experiment, it's certainly interesting. And I mean, generally, it's very. The big struggle was in the beginning when we started in 2003, was to build an open city, because our clients here, the Leal family, they were used to build a very large condominia, which are gated communities. And even this last, I was invited by Pedro, Godoy, and María Sánchez, who were, and Rosales, Pablo Rosales, who were all, they came either from Notre Dame or from Miami, so they were well versed in the new urbanism thing. And the big struggle was really to make the family accept the idea that we are going to build an open city, not gated, because we are surrounded here by gated cities. And my argument as a lapsed Catholic was that, it's your Christian duty to build the open city, because the Christian city is inheritor of the Greek, Roman Christian city. It is that which invented, in fact, the Persians did, and the Iran did well before Greece and Rome, to build an open city which is not gated by tribes and so on. And in the end, they were convinced. So we built an open city, but it's of course more for the upper classes, because it's expensive compared to in the market here. But on the other hand, on weekends you have a lot of indigenous people come here, and it's because it's open and they like it, and just like they like nice things.
Is it proving to be safe? Is it proven itself?
Remarkably safe, because there's a large police force, private, but they are dressed civilly. But that works well, because they can't allow accidents here. And when we started in 2003, the charrette started in 2003, our atelier was surrounded by 45 bodyguards with machine guns. Now it's more discreet, and it has become safer since we started.
Yeah.
My argument was, if you go on a building gated community, it's a treacherous safety, because it's creating such a rancor and such a tensions in society, dividing classes and incomes and races, that you are going to pay for it sooner or later. So it's better because the open city worked for centuries.
Yeah.
Reconciling different classes and incomes and races and creeds. So that's at least part of it. The problem is now the residents. There's the wealthiest part of town. The residents want to be gated.
Yeah.
Because there was a part which was gated for a while because of building sites, but now they want to make this permanent, and it's not settled.
Well, isn't that the seaside saga?
Of course. Of course.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
And it's not safe, though, to be Leon Krier.
Sorry?
The architects and the modern criticism is just so hard on you, as Adam was saying. The criticism in the classroom, but also the criticism in the public. I know we were talking about the architectural uprising movement in Sweden. Yes. And so to be Leon Krier, you're always constantly being attacked.
Do you know Arkitektur Upproret, Adam?
Yeah, I've come across them before, and Howard sent me some more information.
It's very, very good. But this controversy, it's very strange, because the architects seem to be one of the last and the artists, intellectuals, seem to be the only professional class who has not accepted democracy. Very true. Is about choices in politics, in religion, in education. And in whatever you buy, in hardware and software, and why not in architecture?
Yeah.
The monotheism of architects is just out of date. But it has consequence for me that I don't have, except for the Prince of Wales, I don't have work in Europe. And the very last big project I had was in Rome for the mayor of Rome, which was to really rebuild the biggest slum in Rome called Tor Bella Monaca for 29,000 people, 18 tower blocks and 60 slabs, all leaking and too expensive to maintain. So the mayor, and I got chosen from amongst Fuxas and Renzo Piano and Richard Meyer. I got selected. But from then on, I was the class enemy in Italy. When I lived in France, I used to travel to Italy every 10 days minimum. I had articles in the papers, in all the major papers and magazines, regularly, without asking, without ever sending anything. Since Rome, when that was published, the big project with the film, and to an audience of 3,000, who were the most hostile audience I have ever seen in my life, openly hostile. And the mayor was battling against these people, but he lost the next elections partly for this project. And since then, I have no more contacts, no more work, nothing. Even my partner in Rome doesn't talk to me anymore. So when I was selected, it was an open selection in front of a big audience in Auditoria in Rome. After my presentation, Fuxas, who is the most important architect next to Renzo Piano in Italy, said, "Leon, you are dead. Sei morto." So we used to be friends. I said, "You are joking. I'm not here. I'm in the ether." And then he leaned over the table, calling Renzo Piano, saying, "Renzo, Leon, manteniamo come monumento storico. We will maintain Leo only as a historic monument in Italy." And I thought it was just a poor joke. It was an order to the press and to the people present that I don't exist anymore in Italy. And I am now on that, if I was living in Italy, I was only Italian, I'd only work in Italy, I would be in the streets. And thanks God, the same thing happened to me in Germany in the 80s. When I published this book on Speer, Sterling said, "Leo, if you publish that, you will lose all work in Germany." I said, "Who cares about Germany anyway?" But I lost all work everywhere except for the Prince of Wales for years. So, at least reputation allows you then to get, or I had a lot to do with Andres and in America with CNU. So when you have, at least that saved me and many people who talk that way. But if you live in one country locally, you are finished. They put a ban on you and that's it. But I was never in that sense, because I was lucky, because I had this reputation before. This thing, in the 70s, it was an interesting atmosphere, because I taught at the AA in London. I was invited by Elias Zangelis, who was the master of Ramkolas, and I taught next to Bernard Schumi and people of the left and the right. And
Zaha was there.
Zaha was my student.
Yeah.
And so we were all friends, because anyone interested in architecture, which is not horrible, unpleasant, and ugly, we were all friends, because we were interested that architecture should be something interesting and nice.
Yeah.
But in the 80s, this changed, because when Mitterrand came to power, modernism came back into official power with a good conscience. Whereas in the 70s, modernism had bad conscience. Everybody tried to make excuses. And but then the Prince of Wales took sides, and Mitterrand, and they became then the two symbols, the reactionary and the progressive, which is, as we see now, an all too simple story, which doesn't respond at all to reality. But
May I ask? I'm sorry. May I ask about Poundbury real fast, though? May I ask about Poundberry real quick?
Sure.
Poundberry is what, 20, maybe 20 years now?
22 years.
22 years. Is there anything you did 22 years ago that you would do different today? And what are you doing today with Poundberry?
Well, as you may remember, I didn't want to get involved in building anyway because I thought it was corrupt.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
everyone getting involved with building is getting corrupted, and I'm now corrupted too. Because you have to swallow so many snakes that in the end it's eating you up. But because it's not just the ideas, but also the industry is corrupted. Corrupted in a sense, in technological sense, not necessarily in a political or moral sense. And they don't even know it. Maybe what's happening now is going to make people think, and this calming down is just unbelievable. That we overlook here Guatemala City, and you hear no noise. There's no, the normal large metropolis has this enormous base basso continuo, which drives me nuts in London or in Paris. But nowadays you hear the birds.
Yeah.
And no, Poundberry was built only because of the Prince of Wales, and he thought this was. He had been looking for something like that, and I didn't have to convert him. He chose me because I was of a large list of people he consulted. I was the one who did what he wanted to do. He didn't want to do something new, but to do a real good town. And towns are a matter of the past. And there was virtually, except for maybe my brother, Christopher Alexander, and 2 or 3 people around the world who would promote this idea. All the others were just, I always remember we were sitting in Highgrove in his garden with 20 people, and he was fed up with all the people talking and talking and talking, telling him what to do. At one point he banged the table and said, but pointing at me and said, because I was an unknown in that group, or relatively, saying, what do I have to do to build Krier Town? And so the others said, what's Krier Town? What do you mean Krier Town? And he pointed at Krier Town. And they said, oh, but that's just theory. You can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to do it. And a year later, he appointed me. But then it took 4 years to get it started, building. And because initially the palace and his own organization, the Duchy of Cornwall, were totally against it. They had consultants undermining my role. But of these many consultants, I am the only survivor. Not because of my political ability, but because he agreed. That's the right thing to do. And the others were all like, telling him what he could and could not do. And but then it's what all the projects which we do now, they are like 60% jobs. There's none of our projects or CNU projects which are really exactly what we would like ideally to do, what we would think is the right thing to do, because you have to build in a real market with existing legislation, and particularly in our countries and in Europe and the United States, the legislation, it's basically the building legislation is now driven by the building industry, by the building lobbies, and which are beyond reason. And now the whole drama starts with global warming. We find now the sharks begin to use global warming to terrorize populations into something which are totally unacceptable. I think. So it's going from one disaster into the next. The thing is how to preserve your integrity, but it's not easy.
Yeah, no, that's true. How about that idea of what I noticed? I'm looking at your work, and I see so much of the drawings are really diagrams of your idea. They're diagrams of an idea. To the polycentric, mixed-use, walkable city that now today everybody says they do, but. Is there a
as long as you don't say vertical walkability, then
yeah. and then it falls apart. Right. But any thoughts on how to take on how your process from going from diagramming the idea so everybody understands this idea that's kind of against the status quo to a real design. Is there anything that you do interesting or unique or your process to get from diagram to design? I find so many students have a hard time with that translation.
Well, one of the problems is modernism is perpetually renovating its nonsense. And the modernism is now appearing a new ecological vest. You know, they are doing the ecological skyscraper, they are doing green buildings, and they're doing the LEED, glory, the old sparkle of LEED performances. And it has nothing to do with ecology. And modern, you know, even Lufthansa distributes for the miles clients, distribute a special magazine. This is some years back, but special one of their magazines about the ecological skyscraper. And the ecological skyscraper allows you to drive your car into a lift and have it parked in front of your door on the 35th floor. And people buy this nonsense. And because the problem is that our elite, we are educated as an elite, but we don't have the conscience of the elite. The same with, you know, the problem is of planning, for instance, nowadays, is that generally public authorities, while the state has grown into enormous bureaucratic leviathan, but has given up planning. Whereas a minimal state, let's say a state really down to what is necessary, should really employ people like they do for law. They employ a judge to write the law, an independent judge to write the law. Bureaucracy doesn't write laws. The building industry writes laws by lobbies who are very powerful in Washington or in Brussels. And these have consequences, enormous consequences on the building market. So there is no more, it's very interesting, Ayn Rand's concept of capitalism. People all think that she is responsible for Alan Greenspan and people like that. But if you reread Ayn Rand, she says that we don't have capitalism. We have a combination of capital and state. And it is that which is not reasonable and which grows in parts which are really deadly because they over-legislate, and excessive legislation needs colossal bureaucracies to manage it. And so to do now a simple thing, you have to jump through all sorts of troubles. For instance, in Palma de Mallorca, I have a house in the historic area with a terrace on the sea, in a historic location next to the cathedral, and they won't allow me to do a traditional pergola because they want an expression of our time with cables and, you know, this kind of thing. So really the elite is no longer an elite, but they just follow. Instead of leading, technically and particularly morally, they are just corrupted by industry and by fashions. And that is where the problem lies. And that is why we now as planners, you as well, or Andres and everybody, all my colleagues, we have to work we do master planning, not for authorities, but for private developers. And private developers existentially cannot replace a public authority because they must work for the best interest of their shareholders, and that's always the maximum you can get. Whereas legislation, if a legislator rules, he writes laws which are supposed or should be reasonable and led by reason, and then putting fronting the building industry with an equal situation. You know, if you say skyscrapers are no longer allowed, are against the law, nobody would ever think of designing a skyscraper because it's pointless, a utilitarian skyscraper, because you just run into a wall. And that is unfortunately now all these the developments which create suburbia and business districts, like, I mean, now the skyscrapers, the pencils in New York, are purely driven by private partial interests which are against the common interest, which are against the common weal. And I wrote a little text, I'm not sure I will send you, about that actually what urbanism does, traditional urbanism, is that it is an essential instrument to build the common good. And that the common good is not just social advances and about equality of this and that, of sexes, but is particularly about creating a space where all people of different incomes and ages and creeds and convictions and character can rival each other or work with each other in peace. You know? And without that, we don't have common good. It's just
you sent that article to me, and but snippets from that article have been what I've been putting on the Twitter feed that we just started for you. And the common good, and I believe that that's what people are experiencing right now today, such as when we would have to go outside and exercise. We have to get outside of our house. We have to stay apart 6 feet. We have to do, the social, the social disconnection while trying to socially connect. And we're learning about the deficiencies of the common good. So we're closing down parks. San Diego just closed down surfing. You can't surf in San Diego. That's crazy. And so your common good point is excellent, because that goes along with your original idea of res publica, the public realm, and the res private, the private realm, and how that makes society and civilization.
Because it's something which Ayn Rand criticized, that you can't, common good doesn't exist. It's just a result of the Adam Smith theory that all the forces in society, if you let them free, they will work in kind of an equilibrium, but they don't. The society, humans are built of suckers. Winners and losers is now the term. And winners and losers, I hear it more and more, is now becoming an accepted philosophy. That now with the health threat or with, with global warming, there will be winners and losers. And you have to accept this. I remember this also, a friend said, when Israel was in the turmoil in the 70s, being criticized for their behavior, he said, but we have to accept that we are an empire. And that is the problem in America, that it does not accept itself as an empire. Empire and empires are violent. But the problem is, when an empire doesn't have a moral backbone, it has nothing to fall back on in terms of excuses. And that is why conscience, after all, is something you are born with, whether one likes it or not. And people know what is good and bad. And it's only once you are involved in crime, once you are involved in crime, you can no longer be against crime because you are part of it. And that is why my criticism of skyscrapers falls on deaf ears, because so many people would want to build skyscrapers if only they had the chance, but there are only very few skyscrapers being built. Anyway, it's the problem is to define who is guilty. And I think it's guilty. We have done our part in planning, but in philosophy, there's a lot of criticism of the status quo. There's fantastic writing on violence. René Girard, you read that, you understand everything, why human societies produce violence, whatever religion. But the ecologists or the philosophers have not done their work. What is the project, the social project we should fall back onto? Because when capitalism becomes really brainless and criminal. And we can't.
Is that why you, in your writing and your speaking, you use a lot of violent terms like scandalous or murderous, or and when you're discussing, architecture? Was that part of the reasoning?
René Girard is an important theorist for us all to read, because he's the most radical thinker on the production of violence. Why societies produce violence? It's through rivalry and mimetism. By imitating, nature is imitative. And a young rose imitating an old rose in its roseness produces no rivalry. But a young Marilyn Monroe imitating the old Marilyn Monroe and catching her jobs becomes violence. And that is through imitation, we produce rivalry and extreme violence, which goes from the human individual scale to the scale of people and finally to continents. And we had the Cold War. Wars a problem of rivalry of two systems who try to outdo each other in the same philosophy. Because we now notice that what Marx said, I'm not a Marxist, but Marx said, and he was right, that capitalism was the preparation for communism. And now what you see happening in advanced capitalist schemes of management and money and ownership is a new form of collectivism. So how to make sure and the common good will be built by this new society is a project. We have done that architecturally and urbanistically, but it's missing from the philosophers, the thinkers. I had endless arguments with Roger Scruton about this. What is your project?
Right.
It's your philosophic project. What you say people should go to church, but you don't go to church yourself. Or without religion, you can't have society. What is this religion which is supposed to be the one which everybody embraces without being forced to or being born into? And that can only be, I think, a lay form of philosophy, which is not taking a theological side, a one-sided theological concept. And that is really missing. And I don't see it happening anywhere.
Do you feel like your philosophy, the philosophies that you're discussing, Scruton, is expressed in your diagrams?
Yes, Roger
Intrinsically
is a fantastic thinker, and it's so interesting that he became the head of the building a better and more beautiful Britain, and then the shitstorm started. You followed that?
Yeah. Yes.
He basically died of it because I said to him, but this is great, all this slander and all these lies are great because they come now to the fore, something which was always working in the background. Like all the accusations that I was Nazi and they were sympathizing with Holocaust denial, all this nonsense,
Yeah.
is really to undermine not a person but ideas. Don't touch that because you will be banned. But my whole point about why I worked on the Spee and Hitler issue is that Hitler and Stalin and maybe WPA, Roosevelt, those states, organizations and dictators in the 30s were the last who used a millennial system of aesthetic forming their criminal power, giving it an aesthetic form through architecture and painting and sculpture and language, which would give them legitimacy. Now Europe stands naked. Europe has been building buildings for 60 years without quality. Aggressive, cold, unloved, and it's that which makes that Europe has no substance, no reference. When you think of Washington, what do you think of? Washington Buff, you see the dome.
Yeah, that's right.
Correspondent in
Well,
Washington, you see a dome.
Yeah.
Imagine you have just a sausage standing there, or some ghastly skyscraper, or one of the buildings of Europe.
Or Brussels, or the buildings in Brussels at the UN. Yeah. No, that's interesting. I'm sorry.
Well, I think that that classism, and therefore I think it's important that it's interesting that Trump, or at least the people who are now under Trump, some people like Schubo and the Fine Arts Commission, whatever it's called, they try to influence the president in make the edict is not done. It's just a proposal.
Yeah.
Federal buildings should be more attractive. That's what should be.
Yeah. But do you think it's a legitimacy issue for Trump and the idea of classicism?
Whatever you think about Trump, and I don't like his hairstyle or his way to speak and tweet and his politics and his killing Iranian generals. I don't like that any more than anyone. But if he has a good issue, one should say this is a good point. Whether you like Trump or not. What I think is important about is that it will, in the end, force all the candidates, all politicians who run for a job, for election, they will have to, sooner or later, to address that issue, which so far nobody ever speaks about this. And I remember even when the kind of, remember then the scapegoating of Southern generals, take the statues down, as if they were doing something good. Trump, I remember, that's the only thing I remember of Trump, which was really intelligent. He says, don't take those statues down, you're taking down beauty. Because many of those monuments, they are not all, there are some real bad ones, but many of those monuments are beautiful things. And they have a role in memory that, whether we like them or not, they were there. And they fought the war for values which one should better know about. They were not our values, but they fought, to defend slavery. Bloody hell. And they were Christians. And we are supposed to be Christians. How did they do it? It makes people think. The same now, they unburied Franco in the Valle de los Caídos, the Valley of Death, of the fallen. And who are the government to take down a monument which was built by prisoners and which is fantastic a site of reverence and bereavement, because it's not just visited by fascists, but also by people who lost people in all political creeds. So monuments transcend this and makes part of memory, whether we like it or not. Because with that attitude, which is now reigning, we must take down monuments, we must no longer do beautiful buildings. We have to take down all monuments of the past. We have to bombard Isfahan, as Trump wanted to do.
Right, yes.
Most people who have any sense of aesthetics love Isfahan because it's beautiful, the historic part. And the Iranians love Christian architecture, even if they don't believe a dot of what we believe in, because it's beauty which transcends the differences and unifies humanity.
That's a very good point.
Unlike religions and languages which divide humanity.
And Adam, you have to be able to ask something now. I'm sorry to speak over you.
No, the sign of a good conversation is one I just want to listen to. I kind of want to go back and hear a little bit more about. It sounds like all your work is now coming from the Americas that you're engaged in now.
I was brought here by Pedro, Godoy, and María Sánchez, who were students, just finished being students at Notre Dame. And there was a professor here called Warren Orbaugh, who was the key thinker. He had architecture school, and then he was thrown out of architecture school. Now he teaches philosophy at the Moroccan University, which is liberal politics. But he was the thinker who prepared the ground here. And he always wanted to invite me. I had a student in a summer school, in Prince of Wales Summer School in Italy, who was his student. They wanted to invite me to Guatemala, and I was invited to Chile. And I said, I don't go to dictatorships or to countries which are in civil war. I don't want to. No. And but they persisted, and finally I got this work, and which they have many more, Pedro, and now we have work in Mexico, fantastic, probably the best project I ever was involved with, fantastic site near San Miguel de Allende, on a 3-kilometer long ridge with fantastic landscape and trees and so on. A dream of a site. And in Europe, the only project that I ever got out of Poundbury was, I had a second project for the Prince of Wales called Newquay, in Newquay, but I was too radical even for the Prince, so finally I resigned, hoping that he wouldn't accept it, but then he accepted it. And it's building now, because I caused too much trouble. One troublemaker in the palace is enough. I got another project for a fantastic site near Southampton 3 years ago for a very large landowner on the sound of Southampton Sound, opposite Isle of Wight, and with a gigantic power station, which was the best designed power station I ever saw, because they are usually ghastly, but this one was really fantastic. And so I worked on this for 3 years, but you know, you have to, permitting a project like that is so tiresome that I gave up, because the authorities insisted that we not only destroy the power station, of which there were some very interesting parts. The glass was as good as Stirling, you know, like Stirling Leicester engineering faculty. But particularly we had a tower, 210-meter high tower of the best concrete I've ever seen in the world, not a single crack or any damage. And we wanted to transform this into a real platform with a restaurant, and you know, and would have been the biggest Doric column in the universe, 210 meters high. I mean, you can't beat it. But the idiots from the historic department and the nature, they want to calm it down. They want it to come down. So I'm too old to argue these things. And you know, to work for a private developer is always a problem. We should, as master plans, we should work as independent agents for public authority, which is represented by one person, not by committees. Committees are always political.
My wife's over here yelling, she agrees with you. Well, wait, you just said something very interesting. A minute ago, we were talking about memorials and how we need to preserve so that in order to understand the values of the past, and how could people do that then? So what are we doing now so we can see ourselves? But then what of historic preservation and heritage sites and the things that we just talked, you just talked about, that I always come across, which is preserving modernism, because now it's over 40 years old. It's just in.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on you know, World Heritage sites, preservation, and the idea of preserving memorials?
Well, preservation is another matter. It's not just architecture and urbanism which are corrupted, but preservation and archaeology today may be even more affected by the virus of modernism than architecture. I mean, if you think, for instance, what was possible in the United States in the 1920s, with Rockefeller money, the invention of Williamsburg, it's a masterpiece of unbelievable dimensions, which architects look down because it's just people have funny dresses and so on. Yeah. But it's the best architectural monument in the whole of the United States. It's an architectural museum, not for history so much, but for technology. Right. And for how to organize the town. And it was Williamsburg as a model, which served as master for Washington. very few people talk about this, but if you look at Williamsburg, it's a small version of Washington. And if L'Enfant had been able to do his plan, and Washington he didn't understand anything about architecture, unfortunately. He was general, the land surveyor. He didn't respect L'Enfant. And he respected his own speculators and the commissioners, and they were corrupt. And they destroyed the plan, and L'Enfant died of it. But the whole idea of preservation is really corrupted because historically, when there is good architecture, you don't need preservation, you don't need conservation, because any normal renovation is an amelioration, technically and aesthetically, of what you had before. And only in poor times, restoring or transforming destroys heritage. Like, when Rome was taken over by other populations, they just scavenged ruins for material and didn't care about the architecture. But preservation is only a problem today because there's this division between what they call historic architecture, and I really detest that term because we are not doing historic architecture, we're doing traditional architecture, which is the technology which builds and plans with in natural conditions and with natural materials. And even an idiot cannot build a wrong arch because the arch will collapse. With concrete, you can do anything you want. And any nonsense stands up for a while, but then it rots away, as we now find out. And so preservation is only a problem of that, and most preservationists, they are signatories of the Charter of Venice, even without knowing. It's now so natural to think that when you do work in the traditional building, that you have to show what we are, what is our time, what is the zeitgeist, in color, proportion, materials, character, anything, which means that you are going to destroy basically the fabric of the building you are trying to transform. And that is why I think it was so important, for instance, in Germany, that there are now many projects which I, on the side, help to promote reconstructions of destroyed towns, or like churches in Dresden, or the town square in Dresden, or the historic center in Frankfurt, Castle in Potsdam. There are now many projects of rebuilding. And these projects were opposed in the 80s and 90s. And I remember I was in Dresden in a forum with 9 experts, famous people like Fraiotto and Benisch and all the famous German architects. I was the only foreigner. And there was a delegation there of Dresden citizens who wanted to rebuild the cathedral, the Frauenkirche, the famous by Baer, beautiful stone dome.
Yeah.
And I was the only one of 9 experts who said, of course you can do it. You not only you can, but you should do it. And they said, no, you can't do it. It's impossible to do it. Technologically, philosophically, financially, it was all lies. And these buildings are now nearly all complete, and they're enormously popular. And so the whole theory, the modernist ideology against reconstruction, is proven to have been a lie. And that's why architects feel so threatened in Germany. And there's a professor from Stuttgart, Professor Stefan Trüby, who created an initiative called Reconstruction Watch, English, Reconstruction Watch, that anyone in any part of Germany detecting any sign of any will to reconstruct should be denounced as a populist, and as an enemy of modernism. Gegen Modernismusfeindlichkeit, against enmity to modernism, it's called. So I've been calling out this guy I always think, thank you for quoting me, even if he insults me, he says I'm a racist and so on, that I did racist drawing. I mean, it's completely grotesque. But finally, an important paper in Germany called Cato is a conservative paper, beautiful magazine, Cato, C-A-T-O. Very good. New magazines in 3 years, they publish anything I write. And it's not an architecture magazine, it's more, they publish Roger Scruton, people like that. And so the publisher, Andreas Lombard, he wrote an article in defense of me, why I'm being attacked as a racist and all this nonsense, you know. And he called the article Rekonstruktion und Verbrechen. Reconstruction, I mean, it was a quote, an indirect quote that Adolf Loos, you know, ornament.
Yes.
And France. And then, since then, I've been writing again to Mr. Truby, and now he accepts that we should have a debate.
Yeah.
It would be very amusing. Because I think that these people, I find out that actually this guy probably doesn't really agree with us. But they have sort of strange sympathy, but then they are irritated for some reason. Because somebody in Frankfurt, when he called me a racist, he asked him, the man who had invited me to Frankfurt, he had been at this lecture where he showed a drawing of mine saying this was racist. So he asked him, why do you say this of Krier? It's not a racist, I mean, it's ridiculous. And he said, well, Truby said, well, I have a kind of love-hate relationship with Mr. Krier. Because what I wrote or what we wrote in that article is that this guy, he knows my work intimately, and he knows that what he says is a lie. It's not that it's a hearsay. I quoted, I said in this forum we had in Dresden when they opened the new historic buildings, which are incredibly popular, 100,000 people in the square, for 20 houses, 20 modernist interpretations and 20 historic reconstructions. I quoted a famous German journalist, who is the best German journalist I know, called Ken Jebsen. Ken Jebsen has his own site. If you understand, do you understand German?
My daughters do.
Well, ask her to listen to interviews by Ken Jebsen. They are fantastic. 2 hours, always with writers, with politicians, and they are really. He goes into the material and he knows what he's doing. I wrote to him, he never answers. I even paid for his website, doesn't answer. Too much to do with politics. But so I quoted, you should engage this guy or talk to this guy, involve him in our themes. I was then quoted in a Berliner Tagesspiegel as having promoted Ken Jebsen, who demonstrably, who is a proven anti-Semite. No, who has been who has been arguably accused of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Oh, my God, I mean, do you understand German? This was in an interview with The Guardian. Do you understand German? He said no. So I said, talk to anyone who listens to him for 40 hours, like I have done of interviews, and you will find that this man is not an anti-Semite. He's critical of Israeli politics, but there are many Jews who are critical of Israeli politics. And he goes on writing the same thing.
Yeah.
So and that is what the difference is. They now know that they are lying, and that everyone begins to know that they are lying, and that is going to collapse. I mean, after all, Roger Scruton was accused by this fraudulent journalist, and he's no longer in his job, and Roger Scruton was reinstated in his job, but then he was sick.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of, and the web is for a while will help. That you can no longer accuse people just like that as you used to, and without being corrected, because people are now taken seriously. They check themselves and they find out that Roger Scruton is not an Islamophobe, an anti-Semite, an anti-homosexual. How do you call it? He was in one sentence accused of being Islamophobe, anti-Semite, homophobe, and I don't know what.
Yeah.
It's the left has become so stupid that I felt when I was young, rather on the left, but this is not intelligent, and they are digging their own grave, and it's unacceptable to accuse people of things they are not. because you also reduce the power of the term racism. Racism is something extremely serious and extremely dangerous and extremely tragic, and one should not accuse people who are not racist to be racists, because it devalues the very accusation, because then the real racists, they don't have to worry.
Right, and you can't run to the right because the things that are happening on the right today in the United States are scandalous. We're at 50 minutes. Is there anything else you'd like to say? And I think we could do this more than once. I don't have to take all your time right now. Oh, I want to ask you one quick question. What are you doing today? What's your day? How are you doing with this being sequestered, imprisoned in your penthouse?
We had the charrette, and there were lots of things to finish, and there's more work to do here. But once I have done, I'm nearly done. We had the first presentation, a website presentation, Zoom. You know this?
You use Zoom?
It works very well.
Well, let's use that instead of this. Yeah.
I don't have it, but people around.
Okay, all right, that's fine. And then, are you getting out and walking around? Are you getting out in Cayalá and experiencing it today?
Well, we work too much. Terrible.
Architects haven't noticed the quarantine, huh?
No, but we don't feel it yet. But one feels that the consequence will be terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, what it does to the economy and traveling, and will all change. And so we may be permanently exiled here.
Yes, it might be our Pearl Harbor moment for our society.
No, when I'm done, I'm finishing my book on Le Corbusier.
Yes, you've been working on that
for many years.
Many years.
And I have a very dear friend and collaborator who has worked with me on the Rome project and several projects before, Yamshid Seperi. And he voluntarily put my drawings on computer 3-dimensionally.
Yeah.
And he started like 4 years ago, without, I mean, he just did it for fun.
Right.
And he's in Washington, and we're always far away from each other, and these pictures become just stunning, because if you translate a quick sketch of a reformed Villa Savoie or reformed Chandigarh or reformed Ronchamp into 3-dimensional computer image, it becomes hard work, because you can't sketch on the computer, it just looks awful.
Yeah.
We have now been working for 3 years on the new Chandigarh.
Ooh.
Wow.
But now the book is about translating Corbusier, his best work, his interesting work, not the crap, because he did a lot of crap also. I mean, the Villa Radieuse is just a nightmare. But because some of his buildings have really poetic quality, and when you go there, wherever you are, you feel it. But you are shocked by the materials or by the position and so on.
So did that start as a project? I know you did maybe a studio at Yale where you had students translate Frank Lloyd Wright in different buildings. Is that where the book that is coming from, or was that part of your experimentation?
That was the very end of it. I have always been intrigued by Corbusier, because there's the thing, when you are a traditionalist, you are supposed to hate Corbusier and that he was a monster and an egotist and so on, and that he hated women and I don't know what, or sexual abuser. He was a fascist, that's for sure. He was terrible person. He was unjust, but he was a genius. And he had enormous artistic talent, but it was misguided. And like when genius is misguided, they do atom bombs and things like that, which destroy in one stroke the population of an entire city or country. So if there is something in it, it's wrong to deny it. But what is it in it which transcends, and what is really past? And and he had several styles. One was classical, which he was not very good at, or vernacular. One was ship style, which he was brilliant at. Villa Savoye is really extraordinary building, but has also weaknesses like, unfortunately, it rains in the lift and things like that. And but it's an unbelievably poetical building. Or Ronchamp, whether one likes it or not, there is something which grabs you. And my mother hated Le Corbusier, but she liked Ronchamp. My French girlfriend, she hated Le Corbusier, and she really didn't like Ronchamp because he couldn't think in it. But so we went back, and then I explained, and she began to appreciate it. But now I'm with Irene, and Irene understands Le Corbusier, and she supports the No, but the conclusion of the book is this digitalization of the new Chandigarh, but which is like a whole town, but done in the Corbusier style. Because I used as a lexicon the secretariat of Le Corbusier, which is 250 meter long building, but which is a lexicon, like a near complete lexicon of architecture. And I use that to redesign, to make a whole town. And it shows that modernists don't do their job. They could do interesting towns. And that there were some good samples, like in Paris, there's Rue Malesté-Vins, next to the Corbusier Foundation. It was done in a pre-Bauhaus style, because he did contemporaneous with Bauhaus ship style. And it's a beautiful street. So why the hell don't modernists do attractive buildings, generally?
That's a good question for our next interview. I say that because all the women in my house are now circling around me, I can tell. Well, thank you very, very much. Adam, do you have anything you want to say?
No, this has been absolutely a totally unique experience for me. I just wanted to maybe throw out that we can maybe get some more things like this. There's a lot of discussion out there happening, and so much of what Leon you're saying and writing about and thinking through and working on is very relevant. People talk about it, and so I think I'm interested in basically helping facilitate that discussion and get these ideas more engaged, so you can have an opportunity to really confront people and have your troublemaking discussions that are so fun and stimulating.
What kind of work do you do? Do you do yourself traditional architecture?
Well, I'm a graduate student right now, so I'm sort of architect in training. But my interest is in traditional, architecture, construction techniques.
Do you have a good teacher there who allows to do that? Or
Yeah, no, the University of Texas at Austin is a fantastic program. They're very, very much interested in you coming with theory, thinking through your ideas, and as long as they're rigorously, considered, they will tolerate a discussion and engage with you. And
well, I think, in short, I think we have a lot of sympathize, because what I'm saying is not particularly original, but it is common sense. Because we all lived that world. I grew up in a beautiful town. And to see that destroyed, why? To be replaced by inferior product, and now already the second generation and the third generation of buildings, of bad buildings being destroyed, and replaced by worse and worse and worse. And finally in Luxembourg, people are upset by Norman Foster, who does the worst building in town, which replaced already bad buildings of the 60s. So I think we have a lot of sympathizers and the crisis, but I don't care about having sympathized, but the fact that architecture, whatever was worse in the past, architecture was better. Not because it was a past, but it was an experience, aesthetic and technological experience, which based on doing things which people would love. And that the king loved the stable, and the stable guy, he loved the palace. Because it was beautiful. It's not because they were different origin and income and status that they hated each other's buildings, because they were both beautiful in their sense. And that's, I think, what we have to regain. Yeah.
I mean, it's a good time to. People are sitting starving for information. They're starving for stimulation, and I think now is a great time to get your word out.
A lot of time.
A lot of time.
A lot of time.
Thank you for your time, Leon.
Thank you both. Huh?